In the summer of 1987, I was a Fred Harvey employee at Grand Canyon National Park, who after my summer contract was up, I signed on to work over the winter for Fred Harvey. Right after New Year's Eve of 1988, I was moving into a company housing with my roommate. He was a very evangelical Christian guy named Dave. He was pretty weird and used to cast practically everybody except him into hell. He would stand in Missawak Lodge and pronounce that 98% of the people we could see were going to hell. But not him. Never him. After moving to company housing on the second floor and on the west end of the building, facing the Grand Canyon, there was a knock at the door, and I answered it. I found a deputy sheriff and 2 SWAT cops in full body armor. The deputy sheriff informed me that they had a crisis situation and we had to evacuate the building immediately. After putting on my boots and going outside, I saw a sharpshooter across the street on the balcony of another company housing for employees' building. I could see him sighting something or someone, and then not anymore. They appeared to be on hold your fire stance for the moment. Freaking out and really wondering what's going on, Dave and I thought it was a major drug bust. Back in 1986 and 1987, if you didn't use drugs, you were in the strong minority. Everybody used recreational drugs at the Grand Canyon, and I mean everybody. That's why I and super religious Dave were roommates. Neither one of us used drugs. Dave used to, but he stopped and got sober and super religious. Everybody was going to hell but me and him, he was certain. Anyway, after leaving the building and seeing what I thought was a sharpshooter on hold your fire status, we went down to the end of the street, and since it was cold out, we were told that we could sit in the emergency police vehicles nearby. So Dave and I did, and we could hear the radio traffic going back and forth, as they were getting ready to storm one of the employee apartments in the building we just evacuated, on orders. There was a roll call to see who was in position, and if they could see anything. Radio traffic kept coming back that it was negative. They couldn't see anything and the sharpshooter didn't have a shot he could take, because the curtains were closed was why. Now, both of us were really freaking out, and wondering what the hell was going on. Super religious Dave thought that the devil was in control and maundering around the Grand Canyon. It was obvious, totally obvious. No kidding, I thought. You might be right, super religious Dave. This time anyway. After roll call and everyone was in position, the sharpshooter came over the radio and said he still didn't have a shot. There was a countdown in the signal. Everybody in, it's a go, everybody in. And then, radio silence. Absolute radio silence. Not another word came over the radio for several long minutes. The devil was in control. It's clear, it's real clear. Super religious Dave was sure of it. No shit! I felt like saying, but it's super religious Dave, so I didn't want to curse or use profanity. Then I'd also be going to hell too. That would make it clear. Now, in conclusion, it was not a major drug bust at the Grand Canyon. 2 employees at the time of Fred Harvey had kidnapped an 11-year-old girl in Phoenix, brought her back up to the national park, and were holding her in their room, on the east side of the building and the floor below us. Me and super religious Dave were pretty freaked out. The police got the girl back, but one of the kidnappers had briefly gotten away and was on the run for a little while. Before he was captured, super religious Dave and I were shocked and surprised, but we adjusted to it. By the way, that happened right as I was taken at knife point briefly from one of my other employees in the residence by a drugged up employee of Fred Harvey, who kept telling me that I needed to pay him $80. He needed $80 or he was going to stab me and cut my eyes out. I guess it's just another day at Grand Canyon National Park over the winter of 1987. For as long as I can remember, I've loved to be in the woods. At the time this story happened, I was 18 and had just convinced my parents to let me go camping alone. Keep in mind that I am around a 5'5" woman, in shape, but I like to think that I'm not an idiot. I had planned the trip to be about 4 days long, and I packed accordingly, and let my family know which general area I would be in. Back then, I didn't have my concealed carry, and my only weapons were a small pocket knife and a machete. Looking back, I'm seriously questioning my not an idiot assertion. I don't care who you are, but going on a lone camping trip with no guns is a stupid thing to do. Anyway, I was about 2 days into my hike and decided to set up camp beside an outcropping of rocks. At this point, I had seen some signs of other people, but they looked pretty old and I wasn't really concerned. As I'm setting up, I keep getting the feeling someone's watching me, but when I go to check, I never see anyone. Unsettled, but undeterred, I settle in for the night. I woke up abruptly at what seemed to be only a few minutes later, to the sound of people walking around my campsite. I froze and listened. It sounded like at least 3 men, and from their crazed speech, I thought they were probably on drugs. I quietly put on my jacket and boots, gathered up my courage, grabbed my machete, and unzipped my tent and threw myself out. They all turned to face me, and I could tell they had all been in the woods for a while. They were thin, dirty, and almost feral looking, and they were terrifying. I don't know if it was instinct or God that told me to run, to not try to scare them away, but I just know, if I stayed, I would have died there. They lunged at me, and one managed to grab the back of my jacket. I screamed and hacked at his arm, and he yelled and dropped me. I ran, and they chased me, nearly catching up multiple times as I tore through the brush, gaining more cuts as I went. Somehow, I was able to escape them and hid under a fallen tree, trembling and crying silently. At dawn, I started making my way towards civilization, and luckily my jacket had some power bars and a small water bottle in it. I walked about a day before stumbling into a camp of a couple. I must have looked like a fright, and after explaining what happened, they called the rangers for me. The rangers got there and took me back to my campsite, and of course, most of my stuff was gone. After searching the area thoroughly and finding the blood from one of the guy's arms, they took me back. The rangers never caught the guys, and apparently that kind of attack happened to single hikers quite a bit in that area. I'm older and wiser now, and though I still go on camping trips, I rarely go alone, and I always bring a gun now. One year, a group of us went camping in Kearney, Ontario, where we always go camping. Whenever we go, we always form our tents in a big circle, with the fire pit in the middle of us. We've been drinking, smoking a few joints, and a few of us tripping balls on shrooms. The first night we were there, this guy randomly walks into our circle, introduces himself, I can't remember the name he gave, that he was in the military and decided to take some vacation to camp out a bit. He asked if he could join our fire, as it was getting late and he didn't buy any firewood. Being the friendly, stoned people we are, we let him join our fire. He even pitched in some money for the firewood. The night went on, and we all were having a good time. One by one, our group started heading off to bed, me being either the second or third. I remember waking up to the sound of someone talking and the fire being started. It was 4 in the morning. I peeped out my tent and saw the random just sitting on the log by the fire, talking to himself. Still tripping on shrooms, I thought to myself. I am in no condition to deal with this, and chalked it up to me just tripping out. I wake up the next day and everyone is still alive, thankfully, and the fire is smoldering. We look at the campsite, where the random guy was staying, and it was spotless. No garbage, no tracks in the trail around the site, no nothing. We all started talking about him, just to be sure we all saw him. Through talking, we managed to figure out that he must not have slept at all, and the last 2 of our group passed out at 3:30 a.m. The first person got up just after 6 a.m. and noticed he was gone. The rest of the camping trip went well, and we all went home. Fast forward maybe 4 to 5 years, I flip on the news and there's this picture of someone I could swear I recognize. He was arrested for a bunch of crimes, including rape and murder. Guess who it was? It was the random guy who joined our fire. I don't know why I remembered his face, but I guess it was just a weird situation where my brain right-clicked, saved as a JPEG in my brain. Now, I have no way of proving it was the same guy. We didn't take any pictures of the random, but the picture jump-started my memory and made me instantly remember the weird random fire joiner. Either that or they looked identical to the same person. I'm a 20-year-old male. This story takes place in Australia and happened sometime in January. I was starting my New Year's resolution of getting into shape and started to go for 20-minute jogs around my neighborhood every night. I was on day 20 or so of my jog and was getting used to the trail that I took every time. It was a concrete path that goes along a big lake and around outside of my suburb. Most of the path is surrounded by trees and a parkland. I would usually run at night at around 9 p.m. because it's a lot cooler at night and I like the solitude. I would never see anyone at this time, and I've only seen 1 or 2 people the whole time I've been doing it. It does get a little bit creepy, at times, as it is so dark. Usually, the only light source being the moon. But I never felt scared while running. But this night was different. I was running through part of the trail that has some public exercise equipment off the side of it, so I decided to stop and use it to burn some extra calories. I would do this often during my run. This particular exercise machine was for exercising your chest and was attached to a machine for exercising shoulders. After I had done my first set, I had to take a little break to get my breath back. Still sitting at the machine, it was deadly quiet. All you could hear were the insects from the nearby lake. After a second, I heard someone sit down on the shoulder machine directly behind me. It scared me and I suddenly got an overwhelming feeling of dread and anxiety. I never get scared or nervous easily, but this creeped me out as I did not see anybody ahead of me on the trail before I sat down. I could see a good 50 meters ahead, so I would have seen someone coming. I also wondered why they wouldn't say hello or make themselves known to me. At this point, I noticed that all the insects in the area had gone quiet. This in itself creeped me out. I looked back to make sure someone was actually there, and there was a bald-headed man around 40 or 50 with perfect posture, just sitting in the shoulder machine, facing the opposite way from me. He wasn't wearing workout clothes and looked like he was wearing an old blazer. He kept looking forward and didn't acknowledge me at all. I'm a really logical person, and something about this situation didn't add up in my mind. I thought to myself that this guy was a serial killer and that there was no reason whatsoever why he would just be sitting there. There is also a park bench about 5 meters away that he could have sat on if he wanted a normal seat, so it wasn't because of that. I turned around and did one more set, as not to look freaked out. When I finished, I casually stood up and went to continue my jog, and I noticed the man was gone. I looked all around and he wasn't anywhere to be seen. There were a few treads scattered around the park, but other than that, there was nowhere else he could have gone at the time. I continued to jog up the path, partly hoping I could catch up to him, mainly because it would be better of him being behind me. I ran for 5 minutes and didn't see anyone. There was literally nowhere he could have gone unless he was hiding behind a tree or disappeared into thin air. After that, I head home. To this day, I have no idea who the man was, but I have 3 theories. 1. The man was a weirdo, trying to get a rise out of people and purposely snuck up on me and sprinted away behind a tree. 2. He was a ghost haunting the area, which is why he was wearing old clothes. Also, the park is really old and was one of the first places settled in Western Australia. I don't believe in this one that much. 3. He was a normal guy out for a walk that stopped for a seat who didn't want to talk, then so happened to walk off trail through the park perfectly being covered by each tree as I ran, creating a continuous blind spot where I couldn't see him. I never went to that park again. I now run at the gym and won't be going back to that trail anytime soon. This happened when my dad was 16, all the way back in 1976. Him and my uncle Nigel were very outgoing and liked to explore to keep themselves occupied. When the summer of '76 came around, my dad finished school. He wanted to do one big bit of adventuring before he began work. The Pennine Way. For those who do not know, the Pennine Way is a 270-mile walkway in Britain that, depending on which way you walk, starts in just south of Scotland and basically cuts through the middle of England and finishes in the Midlands. It usually takes around a 3 to 4 week walk. With a long summer to fill, my dad and 15-year-old Uncle Nigel and my dad's friend Russ were dropped off in Scotland by my great-grandfather to begin their hike. The first week went swimmingly. They met some nice locals who even cooked them food and gave them room to sleep in, and generally enjoyed this whole new level of freedom entrusted upon them. They mainly camped in clear areas, but one day, they decided to cover an extra 5 miles in order to reach a village as they needed to buy some more food and get spare tents. They stumbled into a village around 6 p.m. and saw the local pub was opening. After relaxing in the pub with some drinks, my dad tells me that the owner probably knew they were underage, but wanted all the business they could get. The owner offered to let the guys camp out in the back field of their pub. The landlady/wife said the owner seemed oddly hesitant at first, looking a bit concerned and having a bit of a word with her husband in private. However, Yorkshire hospitality seemed to override any doubt she had after a night of heavy drinking with the locals. They resided to their tent. My dad says they were using an oil lantern hooked to a center of the tent as a light source, and when they turned it off, they left it hanging, which is important, not only for what happened next, but also what happened the next day. My dad woke up and turned off the oil light while debating to get up and having a piss in the field, seeming as the owners had been nice in letting them camp out there, when he heard a door creak open from the creak shut. There were no footsteps, so my dad had to put it down to an old shed or something. After a few seconds, however, the sound of feet landing on grass became progressively audible until they stopped right outside the tent. My dad thought it was the owner checking in on us, and he went to unzip the tent. The owner fully unzipped it. My dad said the weird thing about this was that he didn't have a shirt on, just some slippers and night trousers. After my dad asked what was doing, he stuttered out some excuse about hearing a growl and went to check if the boys were okay and safe. There was no growl, as the only sound in the last 5 minutes was the door, the footsteps, and the unzipping of the tent. The guy weirdly emphasized the need for a good sleep before hiking and intrusively tapped on the oil light, asking for it to be turned off. He walked off, letting off a frustrated sigh and nearing the house and closed the door behind him. Morning comes and the owner's wife makes the boys some breakfast while they pack up their stuff. The owner takes down the tent for them and takes off somewhere in his 4x4 without coming back to the house. They thank the woman and tell her husband thank you as well. She says that when she figures out when he comes back, that he will tell him. They come to their designated camping spot, just next to a small stream, around an hour and a half early, and decide to have a longer rest after walking around 130 to 140 miles over the past 8 to 9 days. They pull out the tent and find lots of small holes, all about a pen's width and wide. What's weird about this is my dad described the size of it as holding a pen while telling me this. Everyone looks confused, and my dad rationalizes this by the man telling him about an animal last night. It must have come back and nibbled on the tent. Yes, that explains it, sure. Russ suggests they walk back to a different village around 2 miles back and try to get another tent. They leave the now useless tent as a marker for their site and walk back to the village. With their luck, a shop clearly targeting walkers is open. Unfortunately, they didn't have any tents, but they decide to buy tape and cover the holes for tonight and hope to find a new tent somewhere soon. When walking back, the sun had begun to set and it was quite dark. Moonlight mainly guiding them back down the path. When they returned to their site, they couldn't believe it. Their tent was set up for them, but it was on fire, completely engulfed in flames. They threw the water in their bottles over the tent and used the stream water to fill them and eventually doused the fire. When they looked inside the tent, their oil lamp glass had been smashed and someone had followed them, set up their tent, and waited for them to return before smashing the oil lamp and, in turn, lighting up the tent in flames. My dad told me that there really isn't an explanation except for the pub owner. He was stopping doing whatever he was planning on doing with my dad being awake and decided to take some fucked up form of revenge by sending a message. At first, I totally didn't believe my dad and thought he was trying to scare me, but upon referencing the burning tent incident in a phone to my Uncle Nigel, he instantly started rambling about how weird it was. My Uncle Nigel does not lie. background. We're at an Airbnb in Washington State, not far from Mount Rainier National Park. Our Airbnb host was outside on her horse pasture feeding her horse. We all went outside to greet her and thank her for accommodating us. She lived across the street, so she offered to show us her other property, with more horses and a few other farm animals. We passed her house, and now in her backyard, our host, let's call her Michelle, gets us in a circle and whispers, "So, do you guys want to go back home with a story?" Intrigued, we say yes. We had no idea what we were in for. She takes us past one of her two barns and we walk into a wooded backyard, along with a foot trail that she takes her horses on daily. About 100 feet in, she stops us. "Look down," she says. We see what appears to be a footprint, yet wider and longer than that of a human's. It was especially long, so whoever left the print must have slipped in the mud. There were toe imprints as well. She then began to tell us that this imprint was made by none other than a Sasquatch. While huddled around the imprint, she tells us how she got her house, and then her second property across the street, our Airbnb. You might think I'm crazy, but if I knew about their existence, I would have never moved here. Do you want to see more? Of course, we, a group of 4 20-something-year-olds, do. So Michelle takes us further down the path. At this point, I was feeling a bit uncertain about what was coming or about to happen. Hair stood up on my arms and I got the chills. I kid you not, seconds later Michelle says to us, "Right about this point, here's where you might feel some chills or your hair sticking up." She was spot on there, and I was feeling uneasy and I didn't really want to go forward, yet we walk a little bit further down the path. They had asked me to bring you guys here. They wanted to say hello. Michelle told us, "I've never brought any of my guests back here before, but it seemed important to show this to you guys." We had no idea if we were going to see anything. As it was getting darker and darker out, we stopped for some more conversation. When Michelle stopped us from talking, "Shh, we didn't hear anything." We're all still quiet when Michelle asks us something peculiar. "Have any of you lost a brother recently? Or have any of you experienced psychic abilities?" We all say no. It felt a little awkward and we moved on. We go to the last point in our walk and she was astonished. She laid some sticks down earlier in the day and the arrangement of sticks had changed. "They're always mischievous and like to move things around and mess with us," Michelle explained. She also saying how she left a deceased chicken right at that spot and it was gone. The Sasquatch people must have taken them. She said she often leaves them gifts, usually food, and then they're gone before she knows it. At this point, I'm feeling skeptical about all of this. I'm not a believer, but I also didn't have any reason not to believe any of this. We were all quiet, and out of nowhere we hear a noise far back into the woods. It sounded like an owl's hoot, but very, very far away. Michelle said, "Oh, that's just an owl." But then she took it back when we heard the next noise. I can't recreate the noise in person, nor can I recreate it in my head, but I'll do my best to describe it. It sounded like a monkey's ooh ooh ah, mixed with the laugh of a hyena. Michelle assured us that they meant no harm, and that was definitely them talking to us. She yells back in English to greet them, because they can understand our language as well. We head back to the Airbnb and talk about nothing other than our experience for no less than 2 hours. While drinking, of course. I'm with my best friends and one of them makes it their mission to go back into the woods to search for the Squatch himself. The other tags along, but I stay back because I didn't really want much to do with it. They leave and I go grab a joint to smoke and go out on the deck. It was silent, nothing but me, the cabin, and the beautiful Washington State wilderness. Then I heard it again. The same owl hoot in the distance, followed by the eerie sounding monkey noises. I was alone and stayed up there for an hour until my friends returned and told them I heard it again, yet strangely, they didn't. I was backpacking in Arkansas, the Eagle Rock Loop in the Washita National Forest. There's a section of the trail that goes through an area called the Albert Pike Recreation Area. In June of 2010, a flash flood killed 20 people, including men, women, and children. There's a ton of stories online about this event if you want to look it up. So I start my trip at Little Missouri Falls, going counterclockwise. It's 26 miles with some pretty good climbs. You can find a map of the loop on Google Images. So I hiked a fairly long day. If you Google Eagle Rock Loop map, you will find a basic sketch map, not the topo map, just one of the basic ones with the labels of the trails, mountains, and water crossings on Pinterest. At the bottom of the map there is a single water drop with a yellow circle around it. This just means it's always a wet crossing. There are several yellow circled water drops. The single one at the very bottom right next to the Viles Branch Trail. That is exactly where I was camped, so anyone can go there if you want to look it up and see what I'm talking about. So, that is the Little Missouri River. The water is flowing away from Albert Pike. I'm maybe 4 to 5 miles downstream from where the flash flood occurred. I don't know if this is significant or not to my story, but I'm not ruling it out either. I set up camp at about 4 p.m. for the day. This was November of last year. Fairly cold nights. It was about 26 degrees the night before. I was expecting another cold night in the high 20s. Not a lot of movement around there that night when it was cold. Most animals hunker down. I use a tarp where both ends are open. I have an inflatable sleeping pad and my 35-degree sleeping bag. Now, I'm set up on completely level ground. On my pad, on the tarp inside my sleeping bag, I quickly fall asleep around 10 p.m. after sitting around the fire. Everything is normal all evening, and all night for the most part. Now, you know when you're asleep and you fall in your dream? You get that sensation like you're falling in real life when you tense up and always wake up on impact. Okay, well I was asleep and I get the sensation sort of where I feel like I'm being dragged out of my tarp by my feet. Except it wasn't by my feet, I was being pulled by my sleeping bag. Like my whole pad with me in it suddenly being dragged out quickly. I woke suddenly as it startled me. Keep in mind it was really cold, low 30s to high 20s at this point. And I have a 35-degree sleeping bag, so I'm inside my bag all the way with the top closed off by a shock cord. I'm completely inside my bag covered to stay warm. Now, I'm wide awake and listening for any movement. Everything is still and quiet, except for the river next to me, obviously. That is the only sound I can hear. I didn't peek out my head, I just laid there awake and listening. I sat there for a good 15 minutes listening for any sound outside of the river. I never heard anything. Granted, the river is pretty loud being right there, but there was no movement around my camp at all. So I chalked it up to having that falling sensation when you dream. I figured I must have been dreaming about something and it made me feel like that I fell or something. I went to sleep for 30 or 45 minutes longer, still keeping my ears open but figuring I was probably just dreaming. So for the most part, I just shrugged it off and put my mind off of it and got back to sleep. Morning comes and I get up and put my shoes on and roll out of bed. I head straight over to the fire to pit it and stoke at the fire for first thing because it's definitely cold outside at 6:30 a.m. this morning. I turn back towards my tarp and head over to get my food hanging close by. That's when I noticed it, and I froze. My pad and sleeping bag at the foot end are sticking out from under my tarp, by a good 1.5 feet at least. I can think about how now, as I felt being dragged out from under my tarp the night before, staring at how my bed is from under the tarp. I slowly approach the tarp and look for any sort of footprints. The problem is I don't even see my own because the ground is so compact around there. I double check and I'm not in any sort of slope at all. The ground is completely flat. I really have no idea how this happened, and I know I was startled awake by that sensation of swiftly sliding down the hill towards my feet. My pad with me in it was being dragged out. I quickly had breakfast, packed up and headed out. I was supposed to spend one more night on the trail, but the longer I hiked the more I thought that what would happen the next night. These thoughts running in my head the entire day as I walked. Could it have been another person? I didn't hear anything. Why would anyone do that to anyone else? How could I have slid down so far? Maybe it was an animal. It couldn't have been. There were no punctures in my mattress and there were no footprints anywhere. Did I just slide throughout the night with restless sleep? It doesn't make any sense. I normally sleep on a slight incline, and I've never slid outside of the tarp before. Was this paranormal? I'm not far from Albert Pike. Could this been some sort of ghost trying to save me from a flash flood horror that I was reliving over and over? All day long, the same things were running through my head. I ended up hiking to my car and sleeping in there that night. The Athens Bigfoot Trail was very tough going up over 6 mountains. It was almost dark after I descended the last one. I hiked the last 3 or so miles by headlamp in the dark. I wasn't keen on sleeping on the trail another night after that. Truth is, I've been on that trail a ton, and will for sure go back. I've been all over Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Around 750 miles and countless nights spent in the woods all over the place. I almost exclusively hike solo. I never carry a gun or bear spray. I don't carry a SAT phone or GPS transponder. That is the only weird and unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me regarding camping, backpacking, and the outdoors.
It started several years ago. My and my friends' interest in urban exploration. I was a junior in high school at the time, which was when everyone started to earn a lot more freedom, so we took the chance to be out late whenever we could. Now, keep in mind that I live in a major city in central Colorado, so the nightlife is never lacking. We could always find something to do, and we're especially drawn to the element of danger. We wouldn't always plan these trips, but we made sure as hell that if we were going in any old building in the dark, that we would have a knife and a flashlight for safety. But we never really had to defend ourselves, but we came very close one evening. It must have been around November, because there wasn't yet snow on the ground, but it was really chilly. Directly across the street from the abandoned hospital, which we have hypothesized is still around from the TB era, is a hospital that is newer and in use. The two are connected by an underground tunnel, which I can only assume was a way to move bodies without alerting the patients. This is common, featuring among old hospitals. We have been inside there quite a few times. What was piquing our interest that night was the abandoned library next door to the hospital. It was connected, but only by exterior walls. To get inside, you could not cut through the hospital, but instead had to hop over a tall wall and climb over a very high fence. A few of us had backpacks containing the aforementioned safety precautions and a couple bottles of water, so nothing too heavy for valuable that would get damaged when we tossed it over the obstacle before us. A little ways off the road, it was dark. If you clung to the buildings, you did it for a while before stepping behind a patch of shrubbery, which we determined was an easy way to the first wall, since the only way to gain access was by a chained, unclimbable gate at the bottom of a set of stairs facing away from the ledge. Both were parallel with the library, so when tucked back in the corner behind the bushes, no one could see us from the street. I don't believe I went first, but I did not remain to be the last over that wall. It was too high up for me to jump and haul myself over, so I restored to stepping on a pipe, jutting out somewhere lower among the wall. It gave me a bit of a needed boost, and soon I was up and over. Moving into the library's courtyard, another girl and I waited for our two friends to get over and join us. Upon an initial glance over the courtyard, there was no obvious way in. To our right was a dilapidated fountain, which I took joy in imagining spraying forward a spray of water from its detailed stonework in the brighter summer months. People laughing and talking, and the surrounding trees bringing them shade. Now, however, it had been in long disuse, and the earth at our feet was cold and hard. There were no signs of another soul for years, save the 15-foot chain-link fence directly in front of us separating the courtyard in half. I could tell you it hadn't seen the same weather at the rest of the courtyard because the metal showed no signs of rust. That must be our way in, we agreed, because with a fence like that, someone obviously wanted to keep us out. We hurled our bags over the fence, hearing them clank on the ground, and rather silently due to their lightness. I was the third one over, because I have a slight fear of climbing and it took me a bit to mentally prepare myself. I made it to the top of the fence in short time, and then I sat atop of it straddling it with my leg on either side. I was thinking that had to have been one of the scariest things I've ever been done in a while, because I tend to avoid climbing at all costs. Of course, this is an irrational fear, as I've never fallen, but that phobic fear didn't ever compare to what happened next. The last girl's feet hit the ground and all four of us split up in a smaller half of the courtyard, looking for any kind of entrance. We decided that breaking a window would be too loud and draw unwanted attention, not to mention we could really get cut up, so that wasn't an option. Searching for a little longer, we didn't find anything that looked remotely plausible, until we found a gate near the base of where the walls met. I couldn't believe we hadn't noticed it before, and upon closer inspection, the grate was already moved slightly from its resting place, so it would be easy to lift the rest of the way. The smallest and least fearful of our group went first. After moving the grate, there was a small drop down. It was no more than 3 feet down and 2 feet wide, but inside there was another drop down where we could see into the library basement. She hopped down into the small, squared landing, only to almost immediately freeze. We looked among ourselves, wondering what was wrong. "There's a guy down here," she said. "Wait, where?" "I can see his outline," she said. I leaned forward and tried to take out a step, but make out a shape, but it was further down than my line of sight permitted and too dark. "Hello?" she called out. He responded the same, asking who we were. "Just a couple of chicks," she spat out bluntly. What he said next sent chills down my spine, and it was as if the feel of darkness radiating out of that hole in the ground. All of a sudden, it was very still and quiet, and the darkness had spilled out and weighed all over us. He said, in what I can only describe as a lustful tone, dripping with all intent,
"I'm addicted to following the sound of women's voices."
My friend looked over at us blankly, but there was nervousness underneath, unease, and something in his voice sounded like it wasn't an empty threat, like he wasn't just saying something creepy to get us to leave. She looked back to where he was, and said lowly, "That's not cool." The man under the dark earth began laughing maniacally, and not in the kind of way a really good actor does, in the way that you could feel his utter insanity hit us like stale air. We looked at each other for what felt like hours in the gloomy courtyard, but I knew it was only a couple of seconds, because we all exchanged without even speaking that we had to get out of there, and now. I was not about to risk some nutcase coming after us, even if we did now. The friend scrambled up out of the landing, and I was never over a fence faster in my life. 15-foot potential fall, and I didn't even take the time to think about it. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the streets, down the block, and out of breath. I can still hear that laugh. About 2 years ago, on a summer day, my dad and I went for a quick hike on the hills that overlook our city. On the hills there are many reservoirs, many of which are surrounded by the woods of fir trees, and are places of great beauty and quiet usually. The particular reservoir we were hiking to provided us wonderful views of the city, and we knew the route well. However, since we had been hiking in the late afternoon, we only had an hour or so before dusk set in. We decided to walk fast. We trekked up the pebble path from the bump gate that loops around the reservoir. You can't actually see the water until you've scaled a small mound in front first. Well, Dad and I were nearing the mound, heading towards the water, when things got really strange. This man, probably in his 20s, was running barefooted and shirtless along the mound from one side to the other, back and forth, over and over again. I thought, that's odd. Yes, it was summer, but where I live, summer is not a guarantee of warmth. So, even though it was August, there was still a sharp chill in the air. Plus, we were quite a few feet up to the rush of winds and have made it too cold to run half naked like this. Maybe he was doing it all for a thrill, or maybe he was hammered. We didn't stay long enough to find out. As we approached the water, a good distance from the odd runner, we could see the remnants of a fire ahead of some fir trees. Then ashes, sands were littered in strips of burnt foil, and realized there must have been some drug use here. We thought that might explain our runner friend over there. The man was utterly oblivious to us, so we passed by and he seemed harmless enough. But when we were behind the woods, climbing over the rocky pathway, we saw another man, stumbling and blinking like a drunk. His clothes were filthy. His general appearance was unkempt. He looked rough, and he'd probably been sleeping that way too. Perhaps he'd even been camping on the hills. I was a little uncertain, to be honest. This man stank of alcohol, seemed to be doused in stuff, and he was grumbling to himself as he lumbered by. I worried that he was drunk enough to give us a hassle, perhaps even follow us about. He looked at me oddly, in a way that made me extremely uncomfortable, and I just wanted him to get away from me. Thankfully, he passed us slowly without any issue. I started to breathe normally again, but I was still on high alert. When we came around the reservoir through another bump gate, we noticed that the runner was gone. Didn't understand this as I'd only seen him 5 minutes ago or so I looked around and tried to spot the man himself or his clothes, as I was curious about him. He'd been acting really weird, like he was completely out of it. So I was peering through trees, trying to peek over the reservoir mound. I even looked behind me, up onto the hill, in case he had snuck by us and was climbing up and I didn't see him. We were passing through the gap between some trees, and I was looking into the woods to see if I could find the runner between the firs. But then I saw something and stopped. And not just something, but someone. Someone sitting amongst the trees with dark eyes and face. Eyes that glared at me. What the hell? I was close enough to see that the lurker was a man. His clothes were baggy and his hair was long. I couldn't see his face too well, but I could see his mouth open, and I stared closely. It was like he was snarling at me, like a vicious animal. I was thinking to myself, what the fuck is he doing in the trees? He was crouching about 50 feet from us, quiet and alone. It occurred to me that he may have been the runner, but I soon realized that it couldn't have been the runner, because the runner returned, jogging along the mound about a minute later. The drunk we had passed had gone in another direction, and I hadn't seen anybody else up there, so it was really creepy to just see this person sitting there, lurking amongst the trees. I tried to pretend that I hadn't seen the creeper in the woods and continued walking. My heart rate was accelerating and my head gathered a cool sweat. The thought of him just watching us made me shiver. At least, my dad was with me. Walking back seemed to take an age, and my nerves made it difficult to move. I was tempted to look back around, but I didn't want him to know that I'd seen him, in case he'd panicked and took action. It was getting pretty dark now, and Mr. Lurker about twice as scary, so I wanted to get away from them all the weirdos, even the seemingly harmless ones. Back in the car, I told my dad about the man in the trees. He hadn't seen them. I don't know if my dad truly believed me. Perhaps he felt like I was exaggerating and the supposed malicious intent on the creep's face, but I swear he was scowling and snarling slightly at me. It was freaky. I'd never gone to this part of the hills late again due to this experience. It is truly a beautiful spot and I love going there, but I guess you could say it's pretty dodgy around dusk.
On August 5th, 2001, on US Highway 287, which is 31 miles west of Palestine, Texas, I was traveling westbound at 65 miles per hour when I saw what looked like a bear cub or a very large dog sitting in the middle of the road. I slowed down to 15 miles per hour. I hit my high beams and stopped about 20 yards away from the animal. I put on my four-way flashers, turned on my interior spotlight. As I looked up, I saw a huge bipedal creature that I will call Bigfoot. It walked from the soft shoulder of the road to the animal in the road. As he, I am pretty sure it was a male, walked in front of my tractor, he shielded his eyes, not seemingly out of shyness, but more as an effort to protect his eyes from the bright lights. I reduced my headlights to low beam, but
decided not to turn them off as I was in the middle of the highway. I was doing my best to protect them by blocking the road with my tractor trailer. The big male went over to what I realized was a toddler. He grabbed its shoulder and attempted to grab the little one's arm. The little one scooted away like a child trying to get away from a parent that wants the child to go somewhere and the child doesn't want to go. The little one had greater agility than the big male. The little one squirmed, scrambled, and scooted further up the road where they were. Then, something caught my eye and ear directly next to my driver's window. I casually looked over, and within 2 feet of my face was a female. No doubt female. She had nursing breasts and extended nipples. Her eyes were almost even with my eye level. I measured it from where the top of her head came up to my mirror. It was 7 foot, 4 inches tall. The male was at least 1 foot taller than her, plus some. She had a gamey smile, but it didn't stink. Immediately upon seeing her, I smiled with all the teeth I have. From the interior spotlight, which was pointed down toward my lap, I am sure she was able to see me clearly. I certainly saw her clearly, so clearly I could smell her and feel her breath. I particularly noticed the volume of air that she breathed. Not out of breath or even heavy breathing, just a large volume of air with each breath. I again smiled at her and asked, "Is the baby okay?" She slowly smiled back at me. I noticed a dental anomaly. Either she had a double row of teeth, or the crowns of her teeth were split on the top center to give the impression of 2 rows of teeth. She then reached into the tractor and stroked my beard, like I do when I'm thinking. My beard is mid-chest length and multicolored. It was then I realized the large male's head was identical to mine, although his beard was shorter. The female had thin facial hair on her chin. The rest of his fur was dark brown with traces of gray and white on his shoulders, back and chest. She was a mixture of brown and reddish fur, mostly reddish brown. As she took her hand off my beard and took her hand out of my tractor, I extended my hand out to her. She sandwiched my hand between her 2 hands, and her 2 hands were easily 2 to 3 times bigger than mine. Her hands felt like roughneck work gloves or rough leather. At this point, she gave me a soulful look. From her facial expressions and her watery eyes, I took what she was saying. "Thank you for not running over my baby." The eyes were not dead eyes. They were bright and moist, just very dark brown, but not black. The large male had the child under his arm, like a sack of potatoes. He never looked directly at me as I watched him walk back into the tree line. I noticed at least 3 more, I suspected even more, at the tree line. They ranged from the height of a female to slightly shorter, but none came close to the size of the male.
I have been a ranger in the United States Forest Service for almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on, hanging around campsites, which was weird, since wolves aren't known to be in the area. But when you work in the field long enough, you start to realize anything is possible. No calls have mentioned violent behavior from the animal, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that it had been sighted at. I wandered around for about 3 hours, no further calls during that time, until I took a break for water. I sat down, had a snack, and drank some water, and was getting ready to go again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it would be confusing from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog fucking took off. Like he was playing, to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we were steadily running through the forest. Please don't go around running through woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed or creek area and started pacing around a spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything off at first. Then I noticed it. The overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately, and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone. But honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough and I figured he would catch up later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there had been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought I said something wrong, since there was a pause on her side of the line. After I gave her a couple of details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections and had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that led me to him. I think I spent the rest of that day stunned, and I continue to be in disbelief in a way, but I know what happened.
To start things off, I am 14 now, but this took place a week before my 14th birthday. My parents were divorced and my dad just moved into his new house a few months prior. He moved into the Rockies from the plains of Colorado so he could be closer to work. You see, before this, he had to take a 2-hour drive every day up the mountains to get to work where he would have an 11-hour shift, then drive back. He was a cop and had just gotten back to work after 8 months from his second major back injury. He ended up suing workers' comp and got a decent sum of money from that. So after a few months when Christmas rolled around, he got me and my brother AR-15s. I know what you're thinking, but we have grown up around guns and wouldn't think twice about seeing guns laying around the house. We enjoyed Christmas Day, and when the nighttime rolled around, we went to our rooms and had the guns in our rooms as we slept. Now, before I tell you the next part, you must know that there are a lot of jobs up here in the mountains. Also, my room has 2 windows, one to the left of me and one on the other end of my bed. Anyway, I awoke in the middle of the night, and mind you that I am a deep sleeper, and it is almost impossible to wake me up without shaking me. Immediately something felt off, so I just stayed still and tried listening to what was going on while pretending I was asleep. I was facing the window to the left of me where I could see the forest out my window, when I heard it, the lightest tap on the window I was facing. If I wasn't listening, I wouldn't have heard it. I couldn't see anything that could be making that sound, so I just watched and listened. About a minute later, I hear the tap again, followed by the crunching of compact snow. Then I saw it. Behind a tree about 20 feet from my window, I saw 2 glowing eyes peer out. About 30 seconds later, I saw the arm of someone break off a branch and throw it at my window. Not wanting the person to know I was awake, I slowly slid off the other end of my bed and grabbed my AR-15 and loaded a magazine into it. My adrenaline was pumping because the nearest house was at least a quarter mile away, and we were deep in the woods. Not wanting the intruder to know I was awake, I didn't charge the handle because of how loud it is. I put my phone in my shirt and texted my dad that someone is to the east of the house, and immediately after I heard the sliding glass door above me slide open and the flashlight on my dad's AR light up the area. The guy ran, and I could see he was wearing nothing but underwear and boots. My dad gave chase, but after going a mile into the woods and searching for about an hour, barefoot, and in his shorts, in the snowy woods of the Rockies, he gave up. After, he texted someone on duty at the time, and searching the surrounding woods, all they found was a shirt and a candle on a tree branch.
Okay, so I'm about 14 years old, and I'm a male. And this story happened about 2 years ago. I was staying in my family's country house, which is some sort of farm, like every other summer. So this house is in the mountains, and is surrounded by a huge forest. The nearest town is about a half an hour away by car. To the west, there is a valley, with a trail that takes you all the way down to the bottom of the valley. One foggy day, I was going for a walk in the valley, like I always do, especially on cloudy days like this, because walking around the valley, while the only thing you hear is nature, and the only thing you feel is little drops of water of mist, is very peaceful. So, everything went well until I reached the bottom of the valley, and I was about to turn back to my house. It's then that I started hearing some sort of whistles. At first, I thought it was the birds, but as I kept going up the road, I began to hear footsteps. I started freaking out a bit, so I began to walk faster. Then, I thought that my cousin who was staying in the house with me and my family, who usually tried to scare me with things like this, was there. So I stopped walking and began to laugh and tell him that I'm not so dumb. I expected him to appear from the mist and laugh too, but nothing happened. I continued telling him stuff like that, but still nothing occurred. So, I continued walking, thinking that it was him who was doing it, until I began to hear whistles, not only from my back, but from every direction. At that point, the fog was thick and I couldn't see the surroundings, so I started to feel scared, way more than before, and I began to walk very fast. I kept hearing the footsteps and the whistles, and I started to turn back from time to time to see if anyone was there, but I was seeing nothing. Then, instead of walking fast, I began to run, and that's when I heard some sort of psychopath laughter, and I started to run very, very fast, like I've never ran in my life. I heard it running too, and laughing and whistling. It was doing everything at the same time. I kept turning back, but I kept seeing nothing. I ran until it reached a house, and when I did, everything just seemed to stop. The footsteps, the whistling, the laughing, even the fog seemed to disappear. I told everything to my family, and they thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, because it is very rare to see people in the middle of nowhere. Like I said, the house is about a half an hour away from the nearest town by car, and the only road there takes you to our house. And if someone had gone in the forest, we would have definitely seen it. I told them that it was a person, because I heard laughing. So, we all stayed in the house for the rest of the day and left the next one. I've had some pretty bad nightmares, and I no longer go for walks alone in the forest. But nothing was ever happening to me again. However, the reason why I tell you this story is because I recently discovered that on the other side of the valley lived a crazy man who hanged himself over 30 years ago. My father says that he would randomly laugh so high that they would hear him from our house. I'm not ensuring that he was the one that stalked me, but maybe his ghost. But I don't know. Back in 2010, I had just finished a wilderness leadership class and decided to go to Colorado to get some solo wilderness time. I found out about some hot springs near the Colorado River that were only accessible during the winter. During the summer, the snow melts and it raises the water level of the river and they become submerged. I decided to go spend a few weeks out there. It was on BLM land, and I had about a 4-mile hike from where I had parked to where I was camping. The BLM lady who watched the land saw me, and when I arrived, she asked me to just write the date on my windshield every week to let her know I'm still alive out there. Anyways, it was pretty pleasant out there, but every night I was terrified of the bears. They should be sleeping, but if they aren't, it means they are hungry as fuck, and I'm for dinner. For this reason, I decided to set up camp close to a cliff. It was about 40 feet down to a river, and I figured, worst case scenario, I could jump and then get out of the hot springs to prevent hypothermia. It's a crazy plan, but once you're out there and you realize bear spray is kinda useless inside the tent, so one early morning, I hear those loud animal noises outside my tent. They're getting closer and very loud, accompanied by grunting and breathing noises. I was too scared to open my tent. I just froze. And then I laid there. It starts to move away from my tent, but it's still out there. And now I hear more than one animal. Finally, I poke my head out. It was a few bear, just slinking along. And then, a herd of elk. I swear though, it was probably the most scared I've ever been out camping. I'm a park ranger, but I don't really have any scary stories on the job. But I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, and we spent a lot of time in the woods, and some weird shit happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. One thing happened though, that to this day scares the ever-living shit out of me. I was a leader for the age group of 8 to 10-year-olds, and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain, and it was huge. Normally, we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids even arrive, so we are aware of any of the possible dangerous spots. This time, that was impossible to do. Every camp, we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving shit out of them. Obviously, we had one too many during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods, close to checkpoints that they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time, I could see it was vaguely standing near a tree, not too far away from me. I thought it was one of those other leaders hiding to scare the kids and decided to go over there as it was time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer, I noticed that there was, indeed, someone standing there, dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack, and their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound of what sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer, until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird cramped position. It was, I just can't explain it. I was convinced this was just one of those other leaders pulling a prank, so I told him to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, but I didn't want to turn around and look as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me. If they did, they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them and they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. The next day I wanted to go check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate some wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there was nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree where I saw the person banging his head, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town and left it at that. We didn't notice anything weird after that, so it probably was a prank or something. But seriously, if it was, somebody has some fucked up humor. I was in the Gila wilderness, and a convoy of us rangers were making the drive on the dirt road from Mongolian to Snow Lake when we spotted a forest ranger guy pulled over looking in a ditch. Turns out, some idiot tried to make a U-turn and didn't realize the loose rock makes it hard to stop. They went over the edge and they high-centered. We're miles from the nearest official campground, and it's early spring and the nighttime gets pretty damn cold. We get a jeep with our winch in position and start to pull the guy out of the ditch. Off a hill comes a white dude in a purple velvet sweatsuit. He's got a walking stick, fanny pack, and the purple velvet sweatsuit. That's it. He's a blonde dude and pretty skinny. He comes up to us and tells us he's German and having a great time. We could not get over the purple velvet suit. It was like a real pimp sweatsuit. The ranger is immediately suspicious. Wants to know where he's staying and where he came from. It was around 9 in the morning, and the only way he could have gotten there where he came from was hiking for hours. The German guy is goofy as fuck and just points off towards the other mountain when he asked where he's staying and going. We all think it's funny, but also question how the guy is getting along with no water, no food, and the sun is intense, over 5,000 feet even if it's only 75 degrees. The German guy refuses water or any help and just crosses the road and goes off into the woods. The ranger told us he can't really keep the guy from doing that since he seemed okay. He said he'd check a few campsites in that direction later and see if he made it. We got to Snow Lake and commenced drinking like fish in order to better catch fish. That evening, that ranger pops by to tell us that nobody at that other camp had ever seen the dude. He radioed around, and no other rangers had found abandoned camps or had any missing hikers, and they surely hadn't seen a German dude in a purple pimp sweatsuit. That ranger rode off duty the next day, and his replacement came by to make sure that the other ranger was smoking something we gave him. Never heard a word about the German in the purple pimp suit ever again, but it does make for a good story. Kind of creepy, kind of funny, but at the same time, kind of disturbing. I was the lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. The nearest town from the guard station was about 1.5 hours by car. After moving into the guard station, solar power was not working, and I hadn't slept for about a month due to the various factors. Bats in the cabin and something walking on the deck at night. The woods there always had an eerie feeling about them, unlike the southwest Ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the seasonal job, I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night. Perhaps even on the door. Now, this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I didn't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night, I always had an eerie feeling, like I was being watched. One night, I was returning from my grocery run, always went on Tuesdays nights, and I had a bad feeling. At the time, I did not have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin. About 50 feet from my front door, all I could see were 2 eyes about 3.5 to 4 feet in the air. To say I freaked out was an understatement. I started yelling, "Get the fuck out of here!" But the eyes only crouched down an inch closer. At this point, I could tell it was a large animal of some kind. Definitely not a coyote. I tossed a piece of firewood in the general area, and the creature leaped back a bit, but did not make a sound. I tossed 4 or 5 more pieces, and the creature still inched forward. At this point, I fumbled with the keys, and of course, the fucking solar power was out again. I managed to get inside and grab my shotgun. Technically, we were not supposed to have guns in government housing, but the fuck that, I was not going to be living in this hills have eyes back country and not carry a gun. I went outside, and the creature was a bit closer. Still, I could not get a good look with my shitty headlamp. I loaded the shotgun and continued to throw pieces of wood at it with one hand. Finally, the creature walked back into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPAs and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, the trail crew came up and we found a mountain lion tracks all over the porch, rocking bench, and compound leading back to the creek. After that event, I always heard the rocking chair move or someone or something walking on the porch, but never found any tracks after that point. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird not to find any tracks. I've been stalked by mountain lions before, and never had that eerie feeling like I did in those woods. I have a friend who was a trail ranger. Basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling well, so he said he was going to head back as it's an hour ATV ride. My friend finished up the last one when he heard voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He called out and no one replied. As it's getting dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He reconnected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going fast at all. Less than a half a mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back, basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." They already told him they would, but it would be an hour. He asked if the other guy got back and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long he heard the voices again. It's dark, he's not happy, and the voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone else who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed they had to be less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said they were having trouble finding what path he might be on, and haven't left yet. He asked them just to get the other ranger and to tell them where they are because he left with the iPad that had the map. They said he still hasn't come back. About 3 more minutes go by, and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them, hoping maybe they can stop being drunk assholes and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finally, after 20 minutes he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call, and they said the other guy was found passed out covered in vomit and was being taken to the hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found to stand, so they have a general idea where he is. Then, the radio died. Then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about, picking up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take. I don't fucking care. You better know," and so on. His guess was 2 hunters were arguing over a kill. Then he heard one of them shout something unintelligible. Then, silence. Then, bang! A gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that, he heard nothing, just his breathing for the next half hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up at everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found, and in it was a long dead man who had clearly been shot in the face. Thing was, it was a skeleton who was there for years. So either the argument he had just ended with a bang and both parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago. Back in 2010, I was stationed away from home for military duty near a mountain range. Me and 2 of my equally bored buddies dedicated our weekends to explore the area. We would randomly choose a peak or a valley and try to see the end of it. We would usually hike off trails to experience total solitude. It was one of those days, and we didn't pack any camping gear because we expected to return back to base before dark. It didn't go as planned, as we sort of lost track and it was already nighttime, way into darkness. We were stuck in some random place we didn't know, and we were in a tense mood. We kept arguing about how we got lost, how we should have taken another route and whose fault it was, the typical stuff. After some silent treatment, we saw the light of a small village a few kilometers away. It was a relief. We decided to reach the village and sleep over there. We rapidly hiked lower from the hills and ended up in a dried canyon. The canyon would make turns to the right and left every 50 meters or so, and we couldn't see what was ahead of us. We kept walking under the moon without torches. Just before one of these turns, I saw a couple of glowing eyes in the distance. I didn't make much of it. It could have been any random animal. We were used to it, so we kept walking, and as we made the turn, more and more eyes started popping out. They were directly looking at us. They were not making a sound, and they were not moving. As we walked closer, the number of eyes multiplied. There were maybe hundreds of eyes looking right at us. Large, glowing green eyes. They belonged to something, possibly as tall as us. I couldn't think of any animals that large. We stopped where we were. We froze right over there. The canyon had two ways. Ahead of us were big, fucking alien eyes, and behind us there was a big fucking mountain. We had nowhere to go. After a moment of total confusion, one of my buddies took his torch and directed it at the eyes. As soon as the light reached them, they started running around. There was fucking chaos. The eyes were moving at every possible direction. There were loud barks, and we could tell some of them were running right at us. We couldn't do shit, and we fucking froze. All I could do was take out my torch and knife. I accepted my fate, and I was totally in to get to some of their blood. Then, I started seeing them. I could see who those eyes belonged to. They were running right at us. A pack of unbelievably huge shepherd dogs were running towards us, and the remaining set of eyes belonged to very large packs of cows. It was a relief, sort of. We were not about to be killed by bloodthirsty zombies, outer galaxy aliens, or Chernobyl mutants. But these dogs could definitely harm us and kill us very easy. We quickly closed the ranks and directed our torches in their eyes. The dogs stopped at a 3-meter distance, and they completely circled us. We were stuck there for a couple of minutes, and they kept running around us. Then a man with a hunting rifle appeared in the distance. He shooed away the dogs, and it was once again peaceful. We walked back to the village with him, and his brother took us back to civilization with his tractor. We didn't die. And, geez, those feral dogs, or whatever, were definitely creepy. This is gonna be a little mundane to a lot of other stories I hear on this channel, but I worked for a few months as a park ranger with the Florida Forest Service at my local state forest. The creepiest thing I saw was a poor young man who hung himself on my second week on the job. The unexplainable, though, are obviously not as cut and dry. We'd have children's clothes neatly folded up and left on trails, pairs of shoes in the middle of our dense burn blocks, and just a general sense of eeriness. My first few weeks on the job, I was easily spooked, but after I got into my groove of spending hours alone in the woods, it took a lot to shake me. When the forest goes silent, pack up and move along. There's a lot of creepy stuff that happens out here, and the one thing that I think stands out from my local place is all these weird clothes that just show up, all nice and neat, in very odd areas. Places that these clothes should have never even ended up. And there are real no camping areas out here in this state park, so it doesn't really make too much sense how they got there. Anyways, it creeps the hell out of me, and I'm glad I don't work there anymore. This happened about 3 years ago in Western Maryland. It was late September, and 3 of my friends and I were at a camping trip at a state park outside of Cumberland. We got there pretty early in the afternoon and set up camp because we wanted to hike around a bit before it got dark. Anyway, after we got back to camp and the sun had gone down, we gathered some wood for a fire. We were in the process of building the fire when we noticed a light suddenly appear at the top of the hill by our campsite. We were down in a small valley with steep hills all around us, and it was very dark because it was heavily forested. We all kind of ignored it, thinking it was either the moon coming up or maybe there was a building that we hadn't noticed before. As time went on, I became curious about the light. Like, I needed to go up there and see what it was. My friends didn't share my curiosity and had no desire to check it out. They just kept telling me it was the moon coming up and I was being stupid. To me, the light didn't appear like anything moonlight, and it wasn't really like a moon, so it was starting to creep me out. I took off up the hill and put my mind at ease. The hill was densely forested and full of briars. It was totally dark except for the light up ahead, so I had to proceed carefully. I was almost to the light when I heard something moving up ahead. I stopped so I could hear it better, assuming it was a deer or some other woodland creature. However, it didn't sound like a deer. It sounded like something, maybe a person sneaking in the woods, moving slowly so as not to make much noise. Then I heard another sound coming from the other side of me. I froze, trying to get an idea of what was approaching me. The footsteps got closer, and I just stood there waiting for whatever it was to find me. Then, I saw it. It was the classic gray alien, about 5'5", and the light from ahead was reflecting off of its skin. That is the only thing I remember about it. I didn't get a very good look at it. I was just kind of scared and I think I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember, I was picking myself up off the ground. It didn't seem like any time had passed, but there was a definite lapse of consciousness, like I was taken out and reinserted into time. I decided to go back to the campsite. I could see the light from a fire my friends had made. But on my way back to camp, I start hearing voices inside my head. I have no history of schizophrenia and consider myself a very calm and controlled person. I have never had anything like this happen to me before or since. The voices were very subtle, but they were definitely there. At first I was kind of ecstatic, but I was actually communicating with what I thought were aliens. This is the most amazing thing to have ever happened to me. They tell me I am special, and they chose me to make contact because I was open-minded. However, they soon start mocking me, and their tone gets very ugly, and they begin to sound almost demonic. They tell me I'm going to burn in hell and to kill myself. They tell me to throw myself into the campfire and get it over with. I am terrified at this point, and I can't get the voices to stop. I get back to the campsite, and my friends are enjoying themselves like nothing had ever happened. They talk to me, but their voices sound different. They sound like their voices were the ones that I heard in my head, and all I can understand is that they hate me and want me to die. I pretty much have a panic attack and lay down on the ground crying. The voices in my head continue to torment me, and it just keeps getting worse. Finally, my friend starts holding me and telling me everything is fine. We are both atheists, or at least agnostic, but for some reason she tells me to pray for Jesus. I start praying out loud and asking Jesus to help me. I do this for quite a while, and the voices finally die down and go away. I go to lay down and try to sleep to forget about what just happened, and I see the moon coming up over the hill. One of my best buddies from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in the southeast United States. We haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row, and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they'd taken pictures of when they popped the question about having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle. Then, hiked them to where he thought that it would be. They found it and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back, and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up at night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it. He left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance and wait for them, where he left them. He went back to try to find them. He found them both there, laying down, spooning along the bank of the river. Neither were alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose them to their identities, but weren't sure of anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical pill combination. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My bud wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad for them dying, but said he thought that they wouldn't have asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think that they helped kill them. Just to give you a background on me, I am a 29-year-old, and I have been researching and investigating the paranormal since I was the age of 9 in 1998. I am an extremely realistic and logical person, and I am not easily excited over things that go bump in the night. I have seen and experienced some things in my life which most people will not believe, but that's okay because I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm just here to share. My light in the sky experience happened a few years ago. In 2014, I was living in New York and had gone to Jones Beach State Park one fall night with a friend of mine. It was a chilly night, so we didn't plan on staying out long, but it was nice to be able to walk along the boardwalk without dealing with crowds of people. We had stopped at a covered picnic area to sit down and chat. The night was clear enough to see the stars, which can sometimes be difficult with all the light pollution on Long Island. We lost track of time with our conversations, and as we got up to leave, I glanced up at the sky. I love the stars, and noticed something. It was a very bright light. It had appeared over the horizon that wasn't there a moment ago. My friend, seeing that I was staring off into space, literally looked up and thankfully saw it as well. Of course, we had two initial thoughts. 1, it was an airplane, or 2, it was just another star. We watched it for a few solid minutes, and it never moved from where I sat, ruling out the possibility of it being an airplane. Side note, my boyfriend is an airline pilot, and I spend a lot of time watching airplanes. This is definitely not a plane. So, a few moments go by when we notice a second light, just as bright as the first, appear seemingly out of nowhere. It manifested, if you will, right below the first light, and just hovered there. Naturally, we look at each other and exchange perplexed glances. When we look back up again, a third light appeared below the first two. I don't know how long we stood there looking at these lights, but we did verbally discuss all the possibilities that might explain what they were. We tried very hard to be realistic in debunking this phenomena. After a while, the light shifted, taking on a triangular pattern. Again, we stood, mesmerized, and watched. They did not change positions again. After that, it felt like forever. We finally decided that we should leave. It was starting to get late, and we started to walk away, assuming that when we looked back the lights would be gone. They weren't. They stayed right there in the sky, in that triangular pattern for almost our entire walk back to the car. Only when we reached the park exit did they disappear. We do believe what we saw were UFOs, though I'm not 100% comfortable labeling it as an alien per se. I was working as a prospector's assistant in central Manitoba one summer. We were doing a helicopter-assisted magnetic anomaly investigation. Best summer of my life. There's nothing like ringing in your ears dissipating after the helicopter has dropped you off and slowly increasing volume of the bugs taking its place. You know for sure you are in the middle of nowhere. It was the last day of our campaign. This was a little piece of the property close enough to a road that we didn't need a helicopter. It was a low priority target and was saved until the end. We had kicked so much ass during the high priority targets, we decided to do this one on the last day just for an easy in and out of the bush. Around 9 a.m., we heard yelling in the bush, which was odd. Nobody else should be out here. We kept on grabbing samples, and it's in the back of our mind. Around 11, we hear it again. It's a little closer this time though. We cut back and call out again, but it was silent. Now, through our travels of this 30-kilometer piece of property, we came across many pieces of animal evidence. Deer, moose, and rabbit droppings were everywhere. A few carcasses here and there. Bear tracks and bear feces were seen a few times, but nothing prepared us for what happened next. Around noon, we were in an old blast hole from the 80s. Prospector Dave told me he used to have a blasting license and that blowing shit up in the middle of nowhere is really fun while drinking beer. It's his favorite pastime as a prospector. They changed the laws a few years ago though, so now they can't do it because it caused way too many forest fires. We were facing due west with our GPS on some rocks, getting the most precise UTM it could, when we hear an earth-shattering, bone-chilling howl. I looked at Dave and he turned so white he was almost green. I picked up the GPS and put it in my belt and unclipped my bear safety spray. Then, at our 9 o'clock facing due west, another wolf, then another at our 10, and another, all the way to our 4. Dave calmly said, "We need to leave, but you cannot run. If you run, you die." We left most of our sampling shit there. We also carry these modified steel sledgehammers for breaking rock and scraping moss. Most useful durable thing I've ever had. It's at the ready along with my bear spray and we walk. Longest walk of my entire life. We didn't say a word and I didn't hear anything, but I'm positive they followed us back to the road and into the truck. We drove back to town and proceeded to get thoroughly drunk. In the 90s, before everyone had cell phones, my Girl Scout troop was camping in a state park when a terrible thunderstorm came through the area. With major flood warnings, the rangers at the park frantically came through every campsite and evacuated everyone to higher ground. Everyone, that is, except for us and the Boy Scouts in the site next to us. We went to bed with light rain, but woke up in the middle of the night to our tents collapsing from the driving rain and the water quickly rising. The Boy Scouts, they were 12 to 16 years old, we were 7 to 9 years old and ours, helped us quickly pack our sites into our cars. Unfortunately, the roads were too dangerous to drive on, because we couldn't see how deep the water was, and we didn't know if any sections of the road had been washed out. We abandoned all the vehicles that used the map that scout leaders had to find some place that wouldn't be flooded. A few miles away, there were treehouse cabins that were built around a tree and lofted 15 feet in the air. It was decided that we needed to move quickly, and that was our best shot. The older boys and the adults carried the smallest girls when it became clear that the wind was preventing them from staying on their feet. The wind and rain soaked everyone through the skin. We made it to the cabins, and the adults broke in and raided the emergency supplies there for space blankets. There was no way to build a fire because there was no firewood. It had been an especially dry year, and starting campfires was forbidden due to the risk of starting a forest fire. I remember shivering for hours, all of us girls in the middle of a huddle on the floor with the Boy Scouts on the outside trying their best to keep us warm. One of the boys asked if we knew any Girl Scout songs, either camp songs or more of a Girl Scout thing than a Boy Scout thing, or they were just humoring us. We sang every song we knew, and the leaders taught us a few more that they had learned. At some point, we were convincing the boys to sing in rounds with us. Morning came and the rain slowed down to a light drizzle, and a ranger showed up assessing damage to the park. He discovered us and immediately drove us to get help. They returned with a bunch of trucks and all-terrain vehicles. They drove us to a location where doctors were on site to evaluate us. It was sheer luck that none of us had anything worse than the chills. It could have been worse than it was, and they were unbelievably lucky to have survived it all. We could have easily died in our sleep if the flood had come through all at once instead of slowly rising. If the Boy Scouts hadn't been there, then us small girls would not have been able to hike out of there safely. If we had to try to drive, we would have been washed away. I am a seasonal ranger for my local forest district. Despite the fact that I live in a fairly suburban area, the forest preserves still make up 12% of the county, with much of the property being heavily wooded, not far out to wilderness but pretty secluded in some areas. Being a seasonal employee, I have been on the job for a bit over a month now, but in my short time, I have found creepy things. Here are 3 of those things.
1.
A dead man in a tree. The rest of the rangers say that they find about 1 suicide a year, so here was the one for the year. When we go around opening parks each day, we drive through to make sure everything is okay. In this instance, I was driving through and had just lost sight of the road when I saw a man hanging from a tree in a clearing. He had hung himself. I called the cops and the coroner. Freaking coroner took about an hour to show up, and he was the only one with the ladder long enough to cut the guy down. So I stared at a dead guy in a tree for about an hour.
2.
Crazed, drugged up naked man running around a parking lot. It took me and 3 other rangers to catch him. When we finally caught him, found out that he had multiple cuts across his body, running through brush, and had a rock ledged firmly up his ass.
3.
A headless deer. Normally when a pack of coyotes take down a deer, yes, we have a bunch of coyotes around here, they leave bite marks all over the body, along with torn flesh everywhere. But the head was cleanly sliced off and placed directly off next to the body, meaning this is something created by human intervention. We still haven't figured out that one yet, and I have only been on this job for 5 weeks, so you can only imagine what a full-time forest ranger has probably seen over a long career. This happened in either 97 or 98. The memory came flooding back to me several years after my father passed in 2007. It was not a suppressed memory. It was more like a decade or more of life got in my way and I forgot about it. Anyway, I live in the Midwest, and it was either December or January. It was the time of year where high school is in season, but college is not. So, just before Christmas or possibly early January. I know because my brother was home from college, but I was cheering basketball games at the time. My dad was driving me from home from cheering at a varsity basketball game. It would have been after around 10:30 p.m., and either a Tuesday or a Friday, since that's when the games were. We live in the country, and I do remember it was cold and a brisk night. There was snow on the ground and the moon was really bright and the snow was almost sparkling. We came down our country gravel road and came to the top of the hill where all of our mailboxes were. Dad wanted to stop and get the mail. To the right, there are the mailboxes, and to the left is an expansive farm field. There is no other way to put it, but to the left, there was a large, cylindrical object hovering at a slant over the cornfield. The side tipped downward maybe 5 feet off the ground. There weren't any lights on it, and it made no sound. I think we kind of gaped at it for a while, and then we were like, what the fuck is that? I remember my dad saying that he was going to ask the farmer who owned the land if he had bought any new farm equipment. Mind you, this was the dead of winter, and no one would have been in the field with their farm equipment, let alone one that floats middle in the air like that. I remember saying to him, "Dad, that's no piece of farm equipment." And he was like, "Yeah, I know. Let's get out of here," and roared his little Ford Ranger off into the night down to our house. On the very short rest of the way home, we were like, oh my god, we have to tell my brother and mom when we get home. However, when we got home, my mom was experiencing a severe gallbladder attack. She had been having gallbladder problems for a while, and we didn't have any health insurance, so she had been putting off getting it checked out. Push came to shove, and that night we had to take her to the ER, and she had to have surgery, and this whole crazy experience got lost and was never talked about again. My dad passed in late 2007, and several years after that, like I said above, the memory came back to me like a flood. Unfortunately, now I can't ask him about it if he remembers it too. I did work my way around to asking my mom if Dad ever mentioned anything to her over the years, and she said no, he hadn't. I really wished that I would have remembered before he passed so I could have asked him, or, frankly, that he was still here to ask today. It really bothers me and I really want to know what he remembers from that night. This happened about a year ago. I was 15 at the time, camping with my family, and also a good friend who we will call Zach, who is the same age as me. We were out camping in a campground called Miquelin Lake, which is a campground in central Alberta, Canada. The lake is basically drying up shit pile now, but the scenery is nice, and we know most of the staff at the park. The campground is of modest size and is often filled to capacity. There are a series of trails over by the park center that takes you through the forest. We decided to walk down one of those in the evening. After some walking, we found an old trail that we had not taken before. It was overgrown, but you could clearly tell it was a pathway, and so we took it to see where it would go. After walking for about 15 to 20 minutes, we heard some rustling in the bushes. Zach figured it was a beaver, as they were common around here. But I looked, and to my horror, I saw a cougar's face peering at us from behind the bushes. I could barely make out its yellowish eyes, but it did seem like the cougar was moving. And yet, we still heard the rustling in the bushes. I pointed at it and told Zach, and he began to panic. Cougars often try to stay away from humans, but they are getting more common. So, even though they are unlikely, it is not impossible to find one. I told Zach to remain calm and backpedal away with me, and we began to backpedal. I could tell he was scared shitless, but I told him the rustling was probably its young, and we probably stumbled upon its nest by accident. I figured so long we made a point to backpedal away, the cougar would let us go. We backpedaled down the trail for some time. When we felt we were safe, we turned our backs and continued walking. We rounded a corner only to find the cougar standing there on the trail in front of us. It was staring at us, and obviously wanted to attack us. I was shocked at how fast and quietly it was able to pass us. At this point, it was clear the cougar was toying with us, and that an attack is imminent. I had a K-bar knife on me at the time, in case the situation got worse. And so I pulled it out. Truthfully, a knife probably would not save our lives against such an amazing predator, but it is better than having nothing. It's a useful tool, a weapon for hunting or defense. So, it was better than nothing. I think Zach knew the cougar was probably going to attack too, given my reaction to the situation and the cougar's odd behavior. We were both tall for our age, and though Zach was scrawny, I was quite muscular for my age. Even so, if the cougar chose to attack us, we would be in trouble. I told him to backpedal away once again and to stay close. He did not listen though. He booked it. Before I knew it, the cougar was running towards us. It was fast. I chose to fight as my natural response to danger. It was probably also my best chance of survival at this point, as running would be my only result in being attacked and dismembered. Perhaps, if I bought Zach some time, he would be able to get help from people walking the trails, or there was always the possibility that he would rush to my aid. The cougar got close to me, so fast that I barely had time to react. I plunged my knife into its torso, right as it jumped towards me. It growled in pain, but the wound, though it was deep, was not lethal. Perhaps maybe I just hit a rib. It shoved me to the ground, clawed my right hand, forcing me to let go of the knife, and tried to bite my throat while sinking its claws into my shoulders. Zach at this point was running away yelling for help. To be honest, I do not blame him. Yes, he probably should have helped me out while screaming for help, but some people, they're just too afraid and they don't know how to react. I protected my throat with my left arm, which was lucky by my chest, before it clawed my shoulder, so I was able to defend myself. It bit my arm, which was the worst pain I have ever felt. I could hear the sound of its teeth puncturing my arm and ripping it to pieces. I remembered advice from some show stating that shoving your arm down a predator's throat initiates its gag reflex, forcing it to stop biting you at least for a moment. Remembering this, I shoved my arm further down its throat, and the pain got worse, but I was able to fight through it, and thanks to my adrenaline rush. The cougar gagged and promptly let go of after the struggle. This gave me a few seconds at the most to prepare for the next attack. However, I was still at its mercy, and I knew my chances of survival at this point were low. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang, and the cougar let out a small whimper before falling on its side. I stood up and saw a park ranger running towards me along with Zach. At this point, the pain in my left arm was starting to set in. It was messed up bad, and so were my shoulders, both deeply scratched. I did not realize it hurt me, as bad as I thought it did, until I looked up and felt the pain set in. He explained that other hikers had reported the cougar earlier, and so he came to the trails to find it and heard Zach's cries for help. After performing the first aid, he took it to his truck, which was quite a walk to get me to Zach to our site, and to get me to the nearest hospital as my wounds were serious and could easily become infected. My parents ended up driving me there as the ranger could not leave the campground on duty. Leaving Zach in the trailer at our site, Zach was shaken, but he was amazed that I was still alive. I needed stitches for my shoulders and my left arm, which to this day is still damaged permanently, but it could have been a lot worse. It was a very terrifying moment of my life, and I could have easily died there. Later, after I was treated, I talked to an expert from the park. He told me that the cougar attacked us because it was in pain, and we approached its nest, and it had porcupine quills in its throat. He said that it probably would have left us alone if we did everything right, at least initially. If it wasn't for the quills in its throat, we probably never would have been attacked at all. I have an uncle that used to work as a ranger in Michigan. He's gone through nights of tigers loose in a campsite without a working flashlight, drunk guys drowning in the rapids, and kids found dead from hypothermia cradled peacefully at the bases of tall pines. But he never seemed disturbed when telling these stories. He saw it as just a part of the job. He took me and my middle brother on a walk through my grandparents' woods one evening, while all the adults made dinner. The other two boys were completely occupied with a video game that was only 2-player, and so our uncle decided that he would give us two some special attention. Especially to me, as being the only girl, I would get excluded from a lot. We walked for maybe 15 minutes before my uncle stopped dead at the swamp area in the woods, a place we went to often to hunt for mushrooms in the summer. But right in the middle of the soggy forest fluke was a 10-foot spiral staircase that none of us could ever remember being there before. It was like someone had built a house and everything, but the stairs had been swallowed up by the swamp. At the top was a very small landing where a welcome mat and carpet sat, completely clean and untouched from what we could tell. I looked up at my uncle, and the look on his face struck me like a cold ice pick. He was terrified, shaking like it was winter, and his eyes darting around on the tree line like he was looking for something. He grabbed our hands and walked fast. I have always been very short and unable to keep up. I found myself being carried all the way back to the house. He set me down only when we were in direct sight of the house and told us not to say anything about it to anyone, especially the boys, and to not go out of sight of the house without him with us. We were very confused and scared, and as it sounded just insane, we kept our mouths shut. I recently went back home to visit and convinced my brother to come with me to see the staircase, though it took a lot of convincing to get him to come along, and he refused to go without our gun or a 200-pound mastiff. We got out there to the right spot and there was nothing, just a clearing, no bits of metal, no carpet, just an empty clearing and a nice big patch of mushrooms. Those mushrooms might have been our dinner if our mastiff hadn't growled the moment we stepped towards them. It was probably at a deer, but we left quickly and have never been back or told anyone what we saw. When I was around 10, I was playing at a state park with my cousin, who was a year younger than me. It was a neighborhood park a few streets away from my house, so we were allowed to go there alone as long as we were careful. So, my cousin and I were in this sort of crow's nest thing. We were going up and sliding down this pole. We were pretending to be firemen. At one point, I noticed a white SUV circle around us a few times in the parking lot. Then I saw it again, and again, and again. It wigged me out, so I told my cousin we need to leave, but I wasn't sure if the car would follow us, and I didn't want them to know where I lived. At a certain point during this car's circuit around the park, we would be obscured from its view by trees and buildings, so I waited for the car to reach that point, and then we hightailed it out of there. It's kinda sad because I love going to that park. It's a beautiful state park, but a lot of really creepy reports have been coming in from the park recently from perverts and stuff. I guess you could say perverts ruin everything. While my story wasn't necessarily the creepiest out there, I definitely do think that van might have something to do with some of the missing cases that are coming from our local state park.